What is the cost of the war between Israel and Iran? Continuing strikes from both countries are already draining their economies, and the global economy faces a threat of inflation. So what could be the outcome of a prolonged conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Neave Barker. Israel and Iran are in their second week of conflict. As well as inflicting damage on each other, both countries are putting their economies under strain. Israel has already spent billions of dollars on its war on Gaza, but has upped its spending considerably with its largely air-based attacks on Iran and by using its advanced defence system to shoot down incoming missiles. Iran was already struggling with the effect of years of sanctions, and now its oil and gas facilities are being hit, which also means a hit to its economy. So can the two nations sustain this conflict, which is likely to be worst affected? And will the conflict eventually inflict damage on the global economy? We'll put these questions to our guests, but first, Imogen Kimber tells us more.
Along with devastation, war also comes at great expense. Israel reportedly spent $1.45 billion in the first 2 days of attacks on Iran, and is since estimated to be spending around $725 million a day. That's after already spending $67.5 billion by the end of 2024 on its war on Gaza. The cost of war with Iran is believed to be higher for Israel because of the use of its air force and sophisticated air defence system. On top of those outgoings, much of the country's economy closed down when Israel launched its first attacks on Iran, before reopening 5 days later.
They come to harm us and shut things down. While we strike back offensively, we also protect the civilian population, and we have begun a gradual reopening of the economy and the different areas, all in accordance with security considerations.
But some businesses are unable to function, and some startups have relocated. Investments have slowed, and tourism has reduced. Overall, experts say Israel is at greater risk of increasing its debt, and growth in GDP is forecast to drop. In Tehran, thousands of people have evacuated the city, and Iran's oil exports are estimated to be around half what they were before the conflict began, and some operations have been suspended in its gas fields as oil and gas facilities come under attack. Years of Western sanctions on Iran mean its economy was already suffering with inflation, high unemployment, and a lack of investment before the hostilities began, putting it in a weaker position to withstand the costs of conflict. The war is also expected to have a knock-on effect on the global economy, as energy prices become increasingly unstable. After discussions with the chair of the Oil Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, that includes Iran, Iraq and the UAE, Russian President Putin says the group does not yet have to intervene to calm the market.
These countries consciously restrict the production and supply of energy resources to the world market. Now, however, according to the existing agreement, production is gradually increasing. But like I say, it happens gradually, in order not to create imbalances in the global market and in order to ensure, as we always say in such cases, a balance between supply and demand and fair prices.
Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which millions of barrels of oil pass every day, making up around a fifth of the world's energy supply. To do so would immediately hike the price of oil, and would also be a big blow to Iran itself. For both countries, the war continues to damage already battered economies. But Israel says it will attack Iran for as long as it takes. And Iran says it will not enter talks on its nuclear program while the fighting continues. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
OK, well, let's bring in our guests in London. Aly-Khan Satchu is a geoeconomic analyst and an investor. In Berlin, Eyal is Professor of Economics at the Hebrew University and Lancaster University. Very warm welcome to Inside Story. Thanks for joining us. Eyal, I wonder if I can start with you, because Israel's Chief of Staff estimated the first 48 hours of operations against Iran cost $1.45 billion. It means Israel could now be spending $725 million every day on direct military action. If you were an Israeli government economic advisor, what would you be advising Benjamin Netanyahu right now?
Well, it's very expensive, and wars are expensive, in addition to the enormous damage in life and psychological effect. But Israel is a resilient country economically. Much of its income is coming from the tech industry that is still operating very effectively, in spite of the fact that many people are staying at home. Just during the last year, while the war in Gaza continued, firms in Israel sold several unicorns. That means companies of more than $1 billion to buyers in the United States and other countries. So Israel is resilient. I would make several consulting attempt on how to do this spending, how much to increase the debt, how much to reduce the public spending, but I would not tell the Israeli government to stop the war. The public in Israel is, unlike, by the way, the war in Gaza, that many Israelis want to see an end of it, craving to see an end of it, and suggest the government that we should stop it. The war in Tehran, in Iran, is a completely different story. It's a completely, it gains support across the country.
Eyal, we'll get on to Iran shortly, but Eyal and Aly-Khan, let me introduce you both to Nader Habibi, who's now just joined us. He's a professor of practice in the economics of the Middle East at Brandeis University. A warm welcome to you, Nader. Good to see you. Thanks for joining the discussion. I wonder if I can put the next question to you there, Nader, as you've just arrived. How would you describe Iran's economy before this conflict with Israel began? Because it too, like Israel, had been fighting on several fronts via its proxies in Syria and Lebanon and Yemen. But it also had, of course, been subject to many decades of sanctions. Set the scene for us.
So Iranian economy was already struggling with two major issues. One of them was the pressure of the economic sanctions for well over 2 decades, especially very intense sanctions since 2012. The second one was the mismanagement of the economy, corruption, perceptions of what is right economic policy, which were actually very harmful. As a result, the economy was stagnant. Poverty has worsened in Iran in the past few years, and even economists affiliated with the government and the Islamic regime have acknowledged that the middle class are suffering. The production in many sectors of the economy has been disrupted by power shortages in recent weeks. And as a result of these pressures, Iran was experiencing a number of strikes, including a strike by truck drivers, which had disrupted the delivery of imports to various parts of the country in the past 2 weeks, coming into the June 13th Israeli strike on the economy.
So a very long road of economic turmoil even before the conflict started. Aly-Khan, turning to you, because before this first wave of nuclear sanctions against Iran in 2012, it was exporting 2.5 million barrels of oil a day. That dropped to around 400,000 in 2019. But by last year, its exports, almost entirely to China, had risen to 1.5 million at a steep discount, of course. According to the latest data, Aly-Khan, that's now, in the midst of this war, around 100,000 barrels. I'm not an energy expert, you'll be surprised to know, but that sounds like barely anything at all for Iran right now?
So obviously it depends on how long this lower number will last for, how long this war will last. But I'll make two pushback points to your previous commentators. You know, Nassim Taleb talks of anti-fragility. Iran has been under sanctions for so long that really it's become, outside the oil and gas exports, has become very largely an autarkic economy. And I think it's very easy to sit aside and say, look, 20 years of economic sanctions, the economy is going to crumble. I don't think so. We've now learned economic sanctions. Look at what's happened with Russia, where I think we're on the 37th round, have clearly not been that successful in terms of decimating an economy. I think so. What you're dealing with in Iran, I would argue, is a classic case of anti-fragility. I think it will surprise people how strong that economy will remain under the current level of pressure it's facing. You're quite correct with oil and gas prices, and there is this argument that part of this Israeli response is to cut off the supply of energy to China. They're the biggest exporter of oil and gas. That's their biggest export market. But obviously, it's going to depend on how long this continues and how existential it becomes. If it becomes existential, obviously, all bets are off. But oil and gas prices have risen about 25% in the last 5 weeks from their lows. And if this goes existential, then clearly we're going to see further very, very sharp increases in the price of those two commodities.
Eyal, turning back to Israel, because I'm very keen to understand how the country's economy functions when it seems to be on a permanent war footing. I mean, Israel is contending with the issue of mass reservist calls up, isn't it? I mean, the Israeli Ministry of Finance estimated that for every day involving 100,000 reservists, that works out at about $27 million a day, not to mention, of course, the lack of civilian productivity, because such a vast number of people have been called up to serve their country militarily. I mean, is Israel hamstrung, you think, by its own defense strategy, Eyal?
I think it disrupts lives. It disrupts the economy. The war disrupts the economies. I myself is stuck in Berlin. I had to come back to Israel. There are no flights. The airport is shut down. But Israel has experienced similar periods, starting with COVID, by the way, in which people did not go to work. And then again, during the difficult time of the war in Gaza. And I think people prepared themselves to be productive also while staying at home, okay? It's easier when the main industry is not is a production of high tech, is a production of knowledge, is a production of technologies that are then developed and become a software program or a drug for various patients. And I think what happens now is that people who work in this industry remain at home. They have good connection online between them, and they keep working. They keep working. Oh. And I think they'll keep working as long as they need to remain at home.
Nader, presumably Iran does not have, particularly at the moment, the similar kind of working at home tech-based economy, does it? I mean, how is Iran able to insulate itself from these short-term, hopefully, shocks?
First of all, I think Mr. Khan is correct. The economy is weak, but I in no way claim that the economy is on the verge of collapse. Both the people and the government have learned to adapt to these severe economic pressures. And Iran has had the history of going through the 8 years of Iran-Iraq war. At the moment, the government itself has slowed down and in some occasions even stopped the internet services because they're worried about the penetration of Israeli intelligence service in the internet. If it is restored at the acceptable speed, I think only a small fraction of Iranians can benefit from it. Still, many small businesses in Iran brick and mortar regular businesses temporarily have been interrupted because of what has happened. People have had to move, send their families to other cities. If we move forward, if this conflict is prolonged, the pressure is going to intensify onto people. Some people will run out of savings. And as I mentioned, many people are on the verge of poverty. So we are going to see severe hardship. How will that translate or transform into uprising? I don't think there is any direct process or guarantee that this will lead to instability necessarily. Okay. It just means the suffering will go on.
Right. Aly-Khan, in a situation like that, such an extreme situation for Iran, what lifelines are there for the country? It's estimated that it has foreign reserves of around $33 billion. Could Iran potentially draw on that wealth? And what are the risks in doing something like that in a time of crisis?
So obviously, you know, most countries lean on those foreign reserves as their first port of call when they're under this sort of significant type of pressure. But the problem for Iran is quite a lot of those foreign reserves are compromised or under restriction because of those economic sanctions. But they've learned to circumvent those type of restrictions over 20, 25 years of sanctions. They are experts in that field. They've been doing a lot of barter and all kinds of other ways of sidestepping that sort of very restrictive regime. And then they're going to have to rely on the support of their allies, the Chinese, the Russians, and others to support them at this time. But I think, you know, one must not underestimate Iranian resilience. You know, these are folks who fought 8 years against Saddam Hussein. More than 1 million people died. I mean, you know, the very core of the Iranian character is actually resilience. And I think far more, you were asking about the Israeli situation. The war on Gaza was not of the same ilk as this is. I mean, you just have to look at the footage coming out of Tel Aviv. This is a totally different response to any other response that Israel has previously encountered. And therefore, to assume that the Israeli response is, the average of Israeli is sanguine about what's going on, I think is fundamentally a flawed argument. I think there is a shock also right now in Israel, whose ramifications we cannot measure at this moment.
Thanks for that, Aly-Khan. Turning to you, Eyal, do you agree? Do you think, Eyal, do you think that Iran perhaps has a greater threshold for pain in this current situation? I mean, according to Tel Aviv Institute of National Security Studies, in 2024, Israel's GDP stood at over $500 billion compared to $400 billion in Iran. That translates as a GDP per capita of 54,000 in Israel compared to only 4,400 in Iran. I mean, with that in mind, which of these two countries' populations can weather this crisis the longest, Eyal?
That's something still to see. I don't know much about the Iranian resilient. I mean, I'm sure what we heard is correct. But I know a lot about the Israeli resilient, and I know particularly about the resilient vis-a-vis this war. As I said, unlike the war in Gaza, this war gets the consensus support, because when you have a country that openly speak out publicly about eliminating a country, okay, develop a nuclear weapon for this end, and denies the Holocaust for the purpose of being the pioneer of exterminating Jews, okay, Israelis have been deeply concerned about this situation to the extent of feeling existential risk for their own family, okay? And until this is resolved, people are willing to take enormous cost to sort it out.
Of course, whether or not the case for war is strong enough is perhaps a separate show altogether. But Aly-Khan, I mean, let's focus on the impact of the war and the impact it's having globally, because much of the world's oil and Other key commodities, such as natural gas, pass through busy sea lanes, of course, in the Middle East, including the Strait of Hormuz. What are the immediate concerns to the global economy right now?
So we've already seen in the last 5 weeks an increase in the price of oil of about 25% from the lows. We've seen the gas price also surge by about the same amount. But this is nothing in the context of what could happen. And I think, a lot of people keep poo-pooing the idea that the Iranians would close the Straits of Hormuz. And I think, that is a mistake, because if the regime feels that it's under significant pressure, and that pressure will only come with American bombing, then I think all bets are off, and they could quite likely close those straits. In that eventuality, the price of oil will double from where it is now, and the price of gas will increase by 50%. And in a global economy which has just emerged out of these tariff wars about which no one is speaking anymore, but beyond that, we've got very indebted Western countries. We're unable to raise long-term debt. Each debt auction now in America or in Europe is now a crapshoot. And at some point there will be a failure. We're in a very, very dicey situation. And I think, certainly in my impression is that the Trump administration does not have the skill set to truly understand the economic ramifications of what they're proposing.
Nader, energy shocks, as we know, tend to trigger inflation, obviously the increase of prices of goods and services over time. I mean, presumably countries that are dependent on energy imports could see prices soar.
First of all, in terms of Iran's impact on this conflict's impact on the global oil market, you have two factors. One of them is the disruption of Iran's own exports. The other one is if there is disruption in the Persian Gulf, Hormuz Strait, which affects a much larger amount of global supply. Now, Iran's oil exports now, we assume that they are effectively about 1.5 million barrels or even 2 million barrels. OPEC Plus has enough excess capacity to produce more if needed. And that's why we have seen that after the initial shock of the June 13th strikes on the oil market, in recent days, the price has not increased. Secondly, Iran is reluctant to bring the war to Persian Gulf. One reason for that is that Iran and Saudi Arabia have developed good relations. And right now, Iran wants to focus on striking Israel in retaliation without bringing others into the conflict. This good relationship with Saudi Arabia, good relationship with GCC is very valuable to the regime. And we have seen positive postures from them. I can go into details of that in recent days. Overall, I think Iran will not deliberately bring the conflict into the Persian Gulf unless either situation goes out of hand in terms of Iranian government's control over military strategy, meaning that there is a fragmentation in the regime, or the attacks on Iran in the coming days, including the U.S. attack, are so severe that Iranian government takes extreme measures. Otherwise, They will try to contain the conflict to exchange of missiles and airstrikes between Iran and Israel.
Eyal, presumably the crisis means central banks, for instance, may find themselves trapped between trying to control inflation while at the same time sustain much-needed growth. I'm thinking of European countries, my own home country, the United Kingdom, and the economic shocks that it has had to face because of instability when it comes to energy prices because of the war in Ukraine. I mean, what does this mean for the tough decisions that central banks may need to make?
Usually the economic effect that make a central bank getting involved is only when the long-term effect is detrimental. And as we saw, for instance, during Ukraine war, there was a temporary effect on the markets when the war started, but as the war continued, and was the concept was that it's going to remain regional conflict. Things has not expanded in economic detrimental economic ramification. I think that's the way it's going to stay now. Of course, it depends how severe the work develop and how extensive, whether or not the U.S. will take part of it, and if the U.S. takes part of it, how long it will persist. But if it's not going to be a long war, there's not going to be detrimental or very expansive, I would say, economic effect globally.
Right. Understood. Aly-Khan, you've already touched upon what you think Donald Trump may or may not be doing right now. I mean, he is a self-proclaimed, very successful businessman. He's obviously the most powerful politician on the planet. Do you think all of these factors that we've talked about in this discussion are really being considered and weighed up by the Trump administration as he tries to work out whether or not to pull the United States directly into this conflict?
I wonder as to the skill set that's in that administration. I think, that their big thing was the tariff wars. I just don't know whether they've thought of the second round effects of what they're proposing, which would be, this bombing of the Fordo nuclear facility, and how Iran will respond. I mean, if they seriously think someone like that Pahlavi can be installed in power, then really we've got to wonder how delusional the thinking that is imbuing this administration really is, because that seriously is delusional.
It's been a pleasure to hear all three of you guide us all through what is still a pretty murky situation. There are so many unknowables, but whatever happens in the coming days and weeks in the Middle East will most certainly not have just regional, but also global ramifications as well. Eyal Winter, Nader Habibi, Aly-Khan, Satchu, it's been a pleasure to have you on Inside Story. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Neave Barker, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.